Chapter 2 from Book 1 of Weasels in a Box. You and the bass player from the Boys from Wyoming walk back to the club. It is getting dark. Raindrops continue falling. He turns to enter the club. He is the merch relief. Everyone has his own job to do. One of his is to take over the merch for a while, no matter how adamant the singer from the Boys from Wyoming refuses to break from his salesman duty. It is a tried and true repetition for 2 out of the 3 boys from the Boys from Wyoming. They are cousins. That's Cody and Corey. They have grown up together and have gotten to the point where neither barely has to speak, and all stories are still shared. It is possible that, when they were quite young, they often occupied the same baby crib on special family gatherings, snuggling up next to each other for comfort, or staring silently up at the dangling, jingling, ball-shaped bells of a mobile. They may have collaborated on itemized plans about how to escape from the cage-like walls of their conjoint playpen. They may have more than likely helped each other build houses and fortresses out of playing cards, Legos, and Lincoln Logs. To this day, they can entertain themselves playing video games together for no less than a 7-hour straight stretch on through the night, day upon day, completely sober and wholly content with no ponderous thoughts or prescience. I've tried to use some hoity-toity words here. I wrote about this because when they stayed with me, they stayed at my house, where Jughead's basement is, and they stayed there for quite a while. I think they've become very comfortable at my house, and they actually brought their own game unit. I don't know if it was Nintendo or which one it was, but whenever I came to visit, because I used to sleep over at the Panic Button Records place, they would always be just sitting in the living room playing their games. Like every day before and since, the singer eventually admits to his hunger and begrudgingly leaves to get a bite to eat. There's a McDonald's, Taco Bell, or Burger King on every corner in this homogenized, imaginary country. He has never gone long. You have seen this pattern for about 2 weeks now. It has become apparent that the only place he is comfortable when not on stage is behind the merch table. Cody's actually gotten a lot better at this, but you can still see he's very uncomfortable in public situations. There he is, always separated from the public by a counter full of shirts, CDs, and LPs. Yet he is always face-to-face with the fans. But he restricts his conversation to the mundane and makes ambiguous exclamations, saying things like, "Yeah, I don't know. Uh-huh, cool. And that's $10, buddy." About 6 months before the East Coast tour with the Boys from Wyoming, they stayed at your house for a week to rehearse for an earlier tour out west. There it is. I just told you about that. There was a punk zine sitting on the coffee table in the living room where they had set their sleeping bags. The singer from the Boys from Wyoming spotted his face on the cover of this punk magazine. He read the article. A frown slowly took the place of his perpetual grin. It took the fun from his face. He set it back down on the table and walked out onto the porch. Actually, they stayed at my house, but this incident actually happened at the Panic Button Records office, which is this it's a studio, 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. He stared off into the distance with his hands tucked in his front pockets. The article was short. 2 very enthusiastic fans conducted and transcribed the interview. They were overwhelmed by the band's inability to express their thoughts and motivations intelligibly. At the bottom of the article, they tallied how many times the singer from the Boys from Wyoming had said, "uh-huh," and how many times he had laughed uncomfortably. It was a staggering amount. It was a very funny article, and an objective reader could still tell that the writers loved the band and enjoyed the company. But the singer from the Boys from Wyoming evidently has rips in his protective layer of caul. That's a weird line. I don't know. This is my first book, so I was getting out a lot of my literary references. So that's actually a reference to Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. So, because the name is based on caul, which is the soft part of the brain, and he talks about stopping kids from falling off the side of a cliff. I think it's been a while. It's actually not one of my favorite books, but it's a big book in the punk world, so I made a reference to it. He has not done an interview since. Whenever the article is brought up, he does not get angry, nor does he seem to harbor any malice towards the journalist. He just laughs laughs uncomfortably. And always after these short exchanges occur, for the rest of that day, you can tell his head hangs a little bit lower. He sits and stares off into space a little more often and longer. The bass player from the Boys, Wyoming, enters the venue and disappears from sight. You stand there outside the club, suddenly stripped of direction. You lean against the venue's brick wall and languidly slide down its rough facade. To the ground. Up the street from the club, red light and rolling fog emanate from a thick metal door. A hulking, bald, snake-tattooed security guard sits on a stool right beside it. A place like that could be romantically envisioned as a corridor to hell or a doorway to pure pleasure. But not to someone who has experienced these types of clubs city after city. You have seen entrances like this one too many times. The ideas and images are not boring. They have their interesting and strange quirks and qualities, but when it comes down to it, they are just metal-plated wooden doors, rented mechanical gadgets, spraying chemicals and pounds of steroids, covered in a skin that was pampered and diapered as a child. I think this is always sort of a topic with me and it has to do almost more with the music, but it comes out in the style too. That, in many ways, we're all humans. We have the same way, but we put these layers on of different styles, clothes and music and genres and stuff, and it begins to start separating us from other people. And I think that's good because we are a herd mentality sort of, species. But in some way, I just don't understand how the hostility between these, especially musical styles, forms. So I kind of ponder that a lot, maybe in this book and in my life in general. One after another, leather-clad gothic youths with white clown makeup and alternative hipsters in plastic clothes, pants and skirts made out of bicycle inner tubes and deathly painted fingernails with pointy tips sulk around the diabolical door and pass through its brutal threshold. You look behind you, jeans and mohawks, adolescents with beards and modern primitive piercings, expensive second-hand plaid shirts tied around hips, long hair spiked with crazy glue and dreaded with Ajax, leather jackets and buttons and patches with bands and slogans standing in lines with pennies, lint, quarters, cigarettes, backpacks, and $50 bills. They all wait to pass through an old decaying entrance soaked with the fingerprints of staggering drunks. There isn't much of a difference anymore. Anymore? You look down to see what you are wearing. It could be anything. Pause. You look up into the dark sky and see everything all at once. The rain increases until it resembles static on a television screen. It strikes against the small, quaint side streets and floods over into the gutters. The water rushes through the endless identical channels and plunges into the sewers. This is where the first surreal scene begins. And this one kind of reminds me of... as a kid, I wrote a thing about skyscrapers reaching up and plunging through the clouds, and it also corresponds with I don't know. There's some fairy tales that always stick with me, and the one is the chicken who runs around screaming the sky is falling down. Well, I think it's time. We have come far enough. What does that mean? You look into the street. Punks are scrambling. Gothics are soaring. The water smears makeup, flattens hairstyles, and empowers thoughts of teen suicide and destructive nihilism. Hi! A beautiful young girl blocks the rain and shadows the dim glow of the club streetlight. My friend looks like you. I think that's so cool. You look up at her, and then to her right side, past her slender hip covered in wet denim. The friend is standing about 25 feet away, talking in a circle of drenched chums. He looks over nervously, trying not to be spotted. It's hard to tell whether he is keeping a curious eye on the scene because he is sizing you up as a potential punk star, or if he is watching over his cute, mousy companion, like a big brother, or a jealous lover, or a secret admirer posing as confidant. There appears to be no outright similar aspects in his demeanor. He is stocky, he hunches his shoulders, he has an overabundance of flesh around his waist and stomach, which bulges noticeably through his wrinkled black concert t-shirt. He is oily and homely in a way that is sympathetic, but far from attractive. She crouches beside you and brushes a few dangling, dripping hairs out of her eyesight. This is one of the things where I'm sort of poking fun of myself, because in general, I'm a little bit more aware or self-conscious of my looks and my weight than I think I feel like I should be, and it kind of runs in our family. So I think I'm poking a little fun at myself at this. And she said, I saw you play a couple nights ago in Chicago with the boys from Wyoming. You opened for the Flaming Faggots. That's the Queers. I said to my friends, that's Bunkbed. They said, who? And I said, Bunkbed, the bassist from Semi-Famous. Also, I'll say here that I think my name changes a couple times throughout the book. I haven't read it in a while, but I'm pretty sure I did that and did it on purpose. But they're all based on names that Chris Barrows from the Pink Lincolns would write me letters, and each time he would change my name from Jughead to something like, and Bunkbed was one of them. Bunkbed? The name sounds familiar. She says it is your name, but she could be mistaken. You don't know her. There's no way in hell you could guess her name correctly. Bunkbed? The name seems right when you say it in your head. It could not possibly be your real name, but it seems fitting. What is wrong? Do you not feel like Bunkbed, the bassist from the Semi-Famous? Guitarist. What? I'm the guitarist. Oh yeah, they didn't believe me, but I knew it was you. I partied later that night with the other bands on the bill. We saw another show earlier that day, and they stayed up all night. We got totally fucked up. You remember those other bands. You remember how they seemed to represent many of the stereotypes you tried to transcend and escape when you were in high school. Backstage and in the dressing room at the venue, this teenager is talking about, you expected football helmets to appear from their guitar cases. This wouldn't have surprised you at all. It would have fit in well with the beer bongs and head and chest butts that were accompanied by the overuse of the word dude. This, I think, did happen, but I'm painting it more extreme because years before, I don't think I talked about this in the book, but a year before on that tour where we went to Worcester, where I met that hippie dude, we also played a show with Gorilla Biscuits and Judge, and we were the only pop punk band on there, which wasn't a term yet then. And they were that sort of East Coast serious skinhead music, and they were doing these sort of weird quarterback moves in the audience. And me and Ben were just like, what the fuck did we walk into? So I think I'm referencing and probably used a little bit of my experience from that to come up with that exchange there. There have always been similar bands in the punk scene for as long as the punk scene has been around. You experienced them for the first time when your band played in Connecticut. Oh, there it is. At a show 13 years earlier in a college gymnasium. It was the first tour. It was the third or fourth show. Semi-Famous was semi-unknown. Most of the people were there to see the other headlining bands on the bill. Court and Simeon Snacks, Judge and Gorilla Biscuits, were regional favorites. 500 people who would a little later that night jump up and down in unison with their fists to the ground like militant monkeys at a grand ball, stare blankly as your band takes the stage. A few over-anxious audience members begin to heckle. And this is what the band wants and quickly learns to use it to its advantage. You don't fully realize this while you are standing there with your guitar to the side, wearing the most absurd clothes you could find earlier that day in the local thrift shop. But as the years pass, it will become more and more evident that the effect of this interaction is exactly what will make performing spontaneous, unique, and unforgettable. I'm trying to set up how Ben sort of nurtured his aggressive performance style, humorous but aggressive in the early days. Mr. Famous handles the abusive, mostly stupid, and snide comments thrown at the band like a punk rock Don Rickles, putting most of the juveniles to verbal shame, while the others teeter steps away from beating the whole group into a bleeding, pulpy substance. You don't make it any better when you reach down and kiss the back of the neck of a sternly posed skinhead security guard. I'm not sure if this actually happened and this isn't an incident, but I have done this a couple times with the skinheads when they sort of they look like security guards and they sort of position themselves in front of the stage. They're trying to help out a little bit, but they often actually cause more harm than they're trying to protect and get into huge fights. So I would often kiss them on the head. And the new drummer, named Vittles, surely does not make it any better when he strips naked and shakes his willy to and fro. Vittles, of course, is not vapid. Is I just forgot. Vermin. He is scrawny, foul-mouthed lad with bleached blonde hair and a pale, spotless complexion that attracts little women and homosexuals like geeks to a new Star Wars movie. At first glance, he seems harmless, but he would fight King Kong to the death if it were worth a chuckle or two. I don't remember this description of Vittles. It's pretty accurate. It is also very funny It is still entertaining, absurd, random, and naively shocking. That night back in the hometown before stepping on the stage with the boys from Wyoming, you stared at these neo-modern-day punk rock jocks and had no malice. There's no need to see who could make and spend the most money the fastest in the next 7 days. There's no sense in competing to outdraw them at any gig. You just wanted to get through your set without making a mistake. You wanted to know that someone in the audience appreciated your presence. The crouching teenager stares at you. You don't know if she wants to fuck or just talk casually and stare. Is this another hatch mark on a list of musicians she keeps in her head? She seems friendly enough, staring and smiling. Her nearness warms you. You like this person being around. She represents a longing or a tenderness. It is extremely confusing. You don't know what it is around the corner. You've been here before, and yet you don't know what is beyond this translucent marker. This is sort of foreshadowing the style of the book, about the corner between Middle Eastern cafe and this punk rock place. It's a metaphor for being on the threshold of something. But also the whole book sort of, I talk about it later, but I never actually got involved with women on the road. And it's sort of, it just seemed like that had to be a topic of this book, of exploring that, why and why nots, and actually letting these almost encounters affect the book, because they were a big part of it for me. This teenager is in Chicago moments before your semi-famous band takes a stage 13 months in the future. After 7 years of growing tight and stale, you're angry, quiet, nervous, tired, bumbling with micro moments of ecstasy and depression wandering through the masses. We actually had the 2 shows, the 30-minute shows at the House of Blues. Then we did another one. Maybe I'll put that in the afterwards, but I think for the sake of this book, I combined those two incidents, those 2 separate occasions, into one concert. So I'm talking about one of those 3 House of Blues shows. She says, "Hi," and you say, "Don't leave without saying goodbye," as if she could find you among the 1,300 people rushing out of the door like efficient cattle, and you don't take the time to look when the opportunity presents itself. The thought doesn't occur to you while in the foyer, signing autographs with a borrowed pen that is never given back. The girl will be missed just the same. You miss her still, and it hasn't even happened yet. This is also a theme of mine about friends and people you meet, and I have this weird thing, I've written about it in Even the Blackouts, where I meet somebody who I like, I mean just as a friend, or maybe in some intimate way, and I immediately start missing them while they're still there. It's a weird emotional feeling I get. Been playing guitar? Pause. What? How rude. This interesting person is asking a question, and you're not even listening. You're lifeless, staring at the puddles in the center of the street. Rain is dripping down your nose. You're all sentimentalizing, contemplating a meaningless exchange with an image in the near future. The real thing is right here. It is only a small touch away. I just thought it was really interesting to be able to not just flash back to the past, but flash forward to the future. And that's why this book ultimately takes place in the present, which was after all of these shows, after the Lillingtons, after the House of Blues shows. So even flashing forward is actually still in the past for me as I'm writing the book, almost like the Bible. The young friend, the one accused of looking like bunk bed, walks toward and above and takes the teenager inside. You raise a hand up into the soaking wet air with an ambivalent open palm and say, "Later." Don't simplify this enigmatic encounter. There's some pertinent information here. You never have sex on tour. It is not part of the experience. Yes, there were a few persons that made your heart drop through concrete. The thought of each individual still initiates this reaction. The thought still stimulates your questionable philosophy. But that is not what is in question at this time. You've always felt very strong about this ideal. You never want the physical to get in the way of the enjoyment of meeting individuals. Of course, there are fears and insecurities involved, and the threat of AIDS did come to a peak during the earliest tours. But for the most part, and perhaps in reaction to these fears, conversations and the sharing of personal space with complex personalities has become a deeper, more inspirational adventure. Maybe that is why you felt your territory was invaded many years ago on the Malibu tour, when your singer began proudly announcing over and over again, night after night, from state to state, the story about the cap he wears, given to him by a fan he stayed up talking with all night and never fucked, as if it were a revolutionary idea. It was important to him, and for that very reason it was important to you. Neither of you understand each other in this regard, but there's always been a mutual respect for what you think the other means to achieve. I think this is a fairly accurate description of this stuff going on, so I might not interrupt much more on this if it continues in this vein. A drop of rain suspends in front of your face, and in the frozen moment that lasts long and visits as a glimpse of envy, sadness, anger, judgment, you see Franklin walk out of an apartment living room with a girl younger than both of you. Of course, you are both younger at the time, and she is still young, although older now, probably. She is so sweet and troubled, and the two of you fight passively for control of the conversation, while the three of you sit on the floor with a television at ambient sound. Franklin talks of his love for Catcher in the Rye. Ah, there it is. And you ask questions about Philadelphia and how she floats above it like a cloud watching over her real self, trampled by the weight of her family and school like a pebble ground into the mud. The night moves on with conversation invisible, mute, within the reverberating, spinning, suspended water droplet, and you see it in his face, along with the euphoria spawned by his anxiety and his prescription drug that has just placed the hat just placed on his head by this troubled and princess, squeezing his thoughts and mutating his love, his sex, his compassion, and deep-rooted anger. And you watch yourself watching from under the rain, staring through the drop through your own eyes. You stare through your miniature eyes and see that he has won a battle that you never wanted to fight. And you are left alone, and you can hear them talking all the rest of the late night, just talking, bridging the gap of a half-generation, flirting with the minds and sharing the pains and punk tends to carry around with them. Oh, wait, let me see it again. Flirting with the minds and sharing the pains that punks tend to carry around with them. But it's okay. Perhaps you would have fucked up the kindness and made the mistake of touching her. That would have been meaningless. The drop crashes into a puddle and is gone. That's a pretty sad ending. I go a little bit into the psychology of Ben. I don't try to do that much because I don't claim to know anything. But it seemed fitting in there to sort of show up my point I was making. And the book is also about trying to understand the relationship between me and Ben. That one was one of the more difficult ones to write. And that is the end of Chapter 2. Okay, so here's the corrections I wanted to make. This addendum. The House of Blues shows happened on October 29th, 2000, and then again on April 28th, 2001. 2001 is the show where I destroyed my guitar, and that has some meaning later in the book, at the end of the book, which sort of provokes this whole book to be written. The place we played in Boston, the part of Boston was Cambridge, where the Middle Eastern Cafe is, but we used to always play, I think we did with Weasel, I definitely did with Even and Blackouts, and with the Lillingtons tour. We played at this place called TT The Bears, which is just a couple doors down. And the other thing I wanted to say is I referenced the call in Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, which was one of Ben's favorite books. And the whole thing about him having that hat, he used to always talk about how he felt like Holden Caulfield, the hat that the girl gave him. So I made references to that. The call is actually, it says in the definition, isn't really the coating on the brain. It's what the baby is coated in to protect it in the womb. And then a field, of course, is a field. So he wanted to protect children in a field. And that reference in the book is a poem from Robert Burns. And then then it said about Holden wants to be the person catching the bodies coming through the rye. Holden wants to be the one to save the kids from falling off the earth. So that's a big theme, I think, that falls in this book, and of course is a big theme with Ben, or was then. And that's it. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed.
A thought burst in my head, and I need to tell you, it's news that I forethought. Was it just a dream that happened long ago?